And by the way, if you enjoyed that CD, is called the Pickin' On series, and that is picking on classics. And yes, that did start out with Paint It Black. It's one of my favorite CDs that we have here. And I try to play it as much as I possibly can. Welcome to the Decatur Library. My name is Joe Davidge. I'm the Executive Director here at the Georgia Center for the Book. And on behalf of the Georgia Center for the Book and Revival Lost Southern Voices, welcome to our 2025 festival. So just to get a couple things out of the way, we will have, of course, a book signing following, set up in the meeting room. We will have refreshments set up after the talk for you to all enjoy and mix and mingle. I will have a roving microphone for the Q&A session. We are recording it. So, you know, if you don't want to be on camera, that's fine. If you want to turn around and wave, hi, Mom, it's right over there. Charis Books and More is here. They have the books for the entire festival weekend. So in addition to tonight, you can see all of the books that will be highlighted during our schedule of events. If you don't know, Revival Lost Southern Voices started. It will be the 10th anniversary next year. But it was a brainchild of standing up on the square at the Decatur Book Festival, and Pearl McCaney and Andy Rogers were sort of like kicking this idea around of having a festival that talked about authors and literature that are no longer part of our canon or not easily recognizable to modern readers. And that's how this festival was born. We here at the Center for the Book and DeKalb County Public Library came on as a sponsor and a host in 2019, right before, you know, everything happened. I mean, yeah, back in the days when we used to say, how bad could it possibly get? You know, as a joke, other than that. But we also have a wonderful board who develops our mission statement. So, you know, we are a festival that celebrates historically excluded, erased, or marginalized Southern voices, which, again, you know, 6 years after 2019, could not be more timely and more needed. So just to thank a few folks quickly, Gina Flowers, who is the director of our festival, Jennifer Colatosti, Sarah Harrell, Carrie Miller, and Allie Stonewright. Also thanking Allie's mom, who was here helping greet you all as you walked in. She is a now proud grandma, so extra glad that she is here this evening, spending time away from her grandchild. And also our advisory board that includes Allison Law, Pearl McCaney, Andy Rogers, Anna Shackner, and Monica Weatherly. So, since you all are already sitting up here, feel free to correct me at any point in time or jump in. I'm going to do a quick introduction of our panelists here tonight. Mab Segrest was born exactly. You know, there's so much good stuff. It had to be 10-point font. That's just the way it is. Was born in 1949 in Birmingham, Alabama, and grew up in Tuskegee, where her family on both sides lived for over a century. She grew up into the crucible of the civil rights movement, and her childhood experience in Alabama's apartheid culture shaped her future work as an activist, writer, and scholar. She earned her PhD in English literature from Duke University in 1979. In North Carolina and across the country, dynamic multiracial feminist and lesbian movements gave her the context to unpack her bags and sort them out through as a writer, as an activist, as a teacher, and a public intellectual. My Mama's Dead Squirrel, Lesbian Essays on Southern Culture, collected her earliest essays from the late 1970s and early 1980s. Memoir of a Race Trader reflected on the legacies of her white Alabama childhood. This book rapidly became a landmark work of white anti-racist activism. The essays of Born to Belonging, Writings on the Spirit of Justice, rose out of her work in the 1990s for the World Council of Churches, helping to map transformative justice movements across the globe. Segrest taught and chaired the Gender and Women's Studies Department at Connecticut College from 2002 until 2014, serving as the Fuller Mathai Professor of Gender and Women's Studies. In a 15-year grappling, she returned intellectually and creatively to the South for a deep dive into the archives for Administrations of Lunacy, Racism and the Haunting of American Psychiatry at the Milledgeville Asylum. Segrest has been a Mellon Distinguished Professor at Tulane, a Fellow at Emory's James Weldon Johnston Institute, the Newell Visiting Scholar at Georgia College and State University, and a Fellow at the National Humanities Center. In 2018, after spending 5 years in Brooklyn, she returned to Durham, where she now lives, writes, and organizes. Her conversation tonight is E.R. Anderson, who is the Executive Director of Charis Circle, a nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books and More, and the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. He is a lifelong bookseller and writer and an occasional professor of women's gender and sexuality studies at Agnes Scott College. One of the greatest joys of his life was having the honor of opening for Dorothy Allison twice. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome E.R. Anderson and Mab Segrest to give you the lost Southern voice of Dorothy Allison.
Hey, Matt.
Hey there.
So I'm gonna just say thank you to Joe, to the Lost Southern Voices, to everyone who has put this together. We nerded out for several hours this morning about our love of Southern literature. We realized it's actually kind of rare to get to talk about Southern literature and activism together. Those things are often siloed. Our activist friends, we talk about activism together, and our lit friends, we talk about literature together. And so it's been a real joy to get to sort of hash this out. So I thought maybe you might begin with a little bit of context, but first we want to just talk about who Dorothy is. I assume most of y'all know who Dorothy is and was, but just in case, is there anyone who doesn't? Not familiar. So, okay, most of y'all, okay. So Dorothy Allison is most famous for writing the 1992 book Bastard Out of Carolina, which became an international bestseller. It was on the New York Times bestseller list and was really just skyrocketed her. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. So in some ways, she was not a lost voice in the 90s. She became the rare exception to lesbian feminist writers. She made it in a way that almost no one else did. But she was a radical writer who had written many books before that book sort of crossed over. And that book was really powerful for the fact that it treated poverty, class, particularly whiteness, and the concept of white trash, as well as the subject of incest as a serious thing that could be written about in literature. And so we're going to talk a little bit about all of Dorothy's books, but really more about who Dorothy was as a person. And so I asked Mab to be a part of this evening and to really be the keynote. I asked permission to ask if Mab could be the keynote, because when Dorothy died, I knew a lot of younger people who were paying tribute to her, but I didn't see very many stories from her contemporaries and her friends. And I really wanted to be in conversation with someone who had been in all those rooms with her, having all those contemporaneous conversations before she got famous, and also after she had been famous and was struggling with her writing and still trying to sort of figure out how to be a political person in a world where writing is so dictated by capitalism a lot of the time. And as a working class person and as a lesbian and as a person who identified with white trash and with all of these different names that have been used against her, it felt important to have someone who had been in the trenches with her. And so I'm really honored that Mab has come to talk to us. So Mab, I would love for you to start out by contextualizing kind of what we're going to do here today.
Okay, well, first, hello. Glad to be back in Georgia with many of friends here. This is my memorial tour. I just last Saturday was in Tuskegee with the friends of Sammy Young, who was the first NIC student killed in the civil rights movement by a man named Marvin Segrest, who was in my Segrest very extended family. And I did write Memoir of a Race Traitor very much with him on my heart and mind. And also the work that I did against the Klan in North Carolina was kind of trying to do something in my 30s that I wasn't able to do when I was 15 and 16. So I spent time with Marvin's cousin and her daughter, both of whom are wonderful poets. So we did a reading from our works on Sammy like wasn't public, invited for family, old SNCC friends and stuff, and hope to be doing more of that. So it was very moving to me. spent some time at the archives in Montgomery, looking up my Muskogee, the history of my land and Muskogees in the 1840s. And so now I'm here with Dorothy. And Dorothy was a wonderful person, and she was a brilliant writer, and she came out of a lesbian and feminist movement, this contingent of which, anyway, has our manifesto, the Combahee River Collective Statement, if you know of it. It was this very fierce statement of rearticulation of Black feminism from Black women in Boston, because many Black women were ending up dead, and they were insisting something be done about it. And they did this whole manifesto on what it means to see the world from Black women's perspective. And if you do that, you'll see it. You'll see most of everything. So the people I really respect in my generation, and there are many of them, who were gay and queer, had this agenda: anti-racist agenda, socialist agenda, feminist agenda, and in various ways we've worked to carry that out. And Dorothy was one of the most brilliant writers we had. We had many brilliant writers, and I was lucky that Adrienne Rich and Audre Lorde were kind of, as me as a young person, had them as mentors and kind of guiding stars. So I'm happy to be here and talk about Dorothy. And one of the ways I wanted to do it was share a letter that I found in our archives. We both have our papers at Duke, that she wrote to me, 2 letters she wrote to me, a kind of literary argument, a little bit of a fight, but also like a very deep kind of communication. And it's from June and August of 1985. And it reads, the first one reads like, she's trying to be gentle about her fierce critique of my critique of the grotesque in Southern literature, which is a whole tradition, especially of Southern Gothic writers in the 30s and 40s and 50s, but it certainly continues as our culture continues to try to force us into these models. So I do think that this whole discussion of the grotesque is all too relevant today, all too relevant today, when the cabinet seems to be full of these type of people. So maybe it gives us a kind of hazmat experience in terms of long Southern history for facing these things aesthetically. So I want to read parts of this letter, and then we talked about it this morning. And originally I wanted to get a Ouija board and kind of invoke Dorothy so we could ask her a question and then she could answer. So if you hear like the chandeliers, which we don't have, rattling or something, Dorothy might be trying to get in the word edgewise.
So I wanted to start with just the beginning of this letter. One of the things that I often think about, the founder of Charis is in the room, Linda Bryant, the co-founder of Charis. And Charis is a space that for me has always been beautifully intergenerational, right? And I'm in my 40s, and so I'm sort of this bridge between our younger generation and people who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s now. And one of the things that I love about that is thinking of all the ways that our lives have been archived and all the ways they might be archived, and particularly in this moment when our libraries and archives are being attacked right now in the Senate, like today, like they are being defunded today as we speak. How do we read these archives, right? And I think of them as like breadcrumbs to the future. And so there's something really beautiful about this conversation, and we're going to sort of center it around 3 ideas: the grotesque, the idea of fugitivity, and the idea of hope. And so this letter begins with hope. And she says, "Dearest Mab, I have to take a deep breath and hold on for a minute before I start writing this. I find what you have done with this work so exciting it makes me shake. It is about hope and a place in a history that is actually understandable rather than one more piece of a lifelong trashing. Context, I keep thinking as I was reading along, this is a context I almost trust, and I trust so little, so very little, I'm afraid to tell you how little. So take this slowly and take in easy stages, because the first thing I want you to remember is that this is a life-saving work. I mean life-saving. Don't think I exaggerate." So can you talk about the context of where this conversation began, because I think
Yeah.
as a young person coming to an archive, I might imagine that were writing these across oceans, right? But
Right. Or no, or across a conference that is at war with each other. Like, this is not the Barnard Sex Conference where people were screaming at each other. We were at Fire Island in a cottage together in 1985. I'd known Dorothy since 81 in the second Women in Print Conference. And we both had lovers named Barbara. We were all there together, and I had shared a couple of documents with Dorothy. And so this 11-page letter is her very extensive critique, 6-point critique of what I had, like this proposal I had to write a whole new book on Southern literature that like included Black people and queers, because they weren't doing that. Like Frederick Douglass would have been in this book, but he had to leave the South for some reason. That's literally almost what they said, you know. So I was trying to undo that before theory came along to Duke, where, anyway, I missed my education at Duke. So I was trying to write that book, and I ended up not writing that, but putting it in another essay. So she's responding some to this idea of the grotesque that I'm trying to work through the whole thing. And I'm middle class. My family, yeoman farmers, kind of, got first land from the Muskogees. And on my mom's side of the family, either a judge that threw people on the chain gang after Reconstruction, or a president of a little college, you know. So it was kind of the little town elite. So I'm kind of crossing classes that way too, but clearly had a class privilege she never had, and she was trying to get into that in here. And I feel like, as you can tell at the beginning of the letter, she's being very, very gentle about it, you know, like she doesn't want me to cry, like, you know, like I think she's maybe anticipating a kind of fragility in there, which I hate that whole discourse of fragility. It just makes us fragile. But I was like, I mean, I was in hog heaven. Here I was, a lesbian writer on Fire Island with more homosexuals per square foot than I'd ever been in this little college with our lovers talking to Dorothy Allison about literature. So it's like, to me, it was like, bring it on. And it was a very dialectical discussion that really helped me reframe some stuff. But I think our positions kind of switched in and out over the years. And she makes a prediction about her death that I want to disprove, because I have some text right before she died that we exchanged with each other that I want to be sure to get to.
So she begins to critique your piece by talking about sort of the criticism that you employ on the new critics of the modernists and the Southern agrarians. And she says, what I would do is simply say that to understand Lillian Smith, we must look back at the two traditions which produced her, the one she followed and the one she resisted. It is revolutionary, honey, to even say that, to explicitly name those traditions, to put all us rootless bastards in a family of resistance. It's not that I really go around looking for daddy, mind you. It's just that loneliness you speak of is a death dealer, and we need to see that it is not a fact of nature. We are not and have never been alone. We are not sports, not the grotesques they would have us believe ourselves. We are grotesque, though, which brings me to a very painful part of this piece. You do an interesting thing with the idea of the grotesque, though it makes me angry to read it, because it is not at heart any different than what traditional critics of Southern literature have been doing forever. It's complicated, though, and we should talk about it, because I am not sure I can make it clear without saying hurtful things. Let us please say to each other that we must talk past the hurtful things and trust each other. If we don't just go on playing out one of those patriarchal death trips, the ones they get us to do to ourselves. Grotesque is a buzzword to me, and it has taken me years to sort it out. I am grotesque.
Can I pick it up here?
Yeah.
Do you realize that? Well, yes. Just Dorothy, yes. I mean, I wanted to have this letter kind of floated up from an archive recently, and I wanted to have the conversation with Dorothy. She died very fast, and I didn't get to have it, so I'm kind of having that conversation with her here. So yes, I did realize it. She says, not me, not just me, my family, all blacks, all poor people, all lesbians. We don't have to do anything grotesque. We simply are by definition. Of course, if you throw in incest, child abuse, rape, S&M, violence, poverty, self-hatred, and homosexuality, we've got no argument, right? All those grotesque realities, right? All right, down to the bottom line. I have to ask you, where does this put me in my life? Take that whole list and you have my life, my sister's life, my mother's, my cousins, my aunts. What is grotesque, Mab? What do you think is happening in those novels by Williams and O'Connor and McCullers? Do you know what I see as compassion and love, a championing of what the world calls grotesque? Do you see that I might believe that a radical act, the only Christian act I believe in, loving the world, tells what the world tells you is sick and hateful and contemptible? For me, it's about loving my own life when I don't drink and don't tie myself up in knots with my own suicidal impulses. I try very hard to love myself, to love the grotesque. Do you know that I expect to die a grotesque death? No, I've got the receipts that she didn't. I just want to say that. So if I go back to this, like, of course, when she has this list, it's not just doesn't just happen to poor people. You know, there's rape across classes, and there's homosexuality, and there's all those things. Like there's incest, but there's not poverty. And she was trying to point out the particular role of poverty in her family and what it meant for your whole family and your whole class to be grotesque. And I think what I wanted to say, what I want to ask you about, to see if this made sense to you, like I was writing about the grotesque from within the white norm, the white supremacist norm that was reinforced by deep violence. And so if you weren't it, you stepped into the grotesque pretty fast yourself. You know, like you weren't going to be the regular white person, which is one of the reasons I named my book Race Traitor. Those white people can get shot if we align too much with folks who are black or brown, you know. So it's a different thing to be grotesque within that tradition that's norm than to be grotesque as a part of a larger class. And so I just think we had different social locations, but anything she trusted in me as being a lesbian, she says later, you're essentially a lesbian. Well, probably, you know, but I was that kind of a lesbian. But I mean, I could challenge my own culture. She could trust me to challenge my own culture because I was already outside of it. And I recognized that very early when I was 13, and I looked through 200 state troopers and their horses to see 4 black kids in Tuskegee High School integrating in high school after Wallace had sent 200 people to surround it and keep us away. And I had this huge moment of empathy, like they could be me. You know, that could be me. What does it mean that they have to have so much force to separate white people? You know, and I think it was just a human empathy, but I also think that I already was recognizing that I could also be them, that really, as I learned my life later, the record of the civil rights movement showed me a way out with courage and brilliance and persistence to the kind of upside down culture that I suddenly realized I was probably in. So I did bring that perspective on the grotesque from being a white person, and what I recognized was a grotesque white culture. But it took me a while to sort that through. So we're coming at different places. But I would like to say, Dorothy, that I was also grotesque, and I knew that too, and that's what you trusted.
Okay. And she gets at that, and I think it's worth reading. She says, I can't see a way around it, not being who I am and with this life behind me. They will make me grotesque no matter what I do, in a way they will not quite make you, in a way they could not quite make Lillian Smith. Do you know that the difference is class, and that at the heart it is about what can permissively be said about my kind of person versus yours? No matter how much I liked and admired you, I would not be able to talk to you honestly if that were so. A lot of what I can speak to you is, in fact, about your essential lesbianism, the distance between who you are and who you were meant to be. If you were truly your daddy's daughter, I don't think we would speak, not honestly. I would not tell you what I tell you now.
Because I was my daddy's lesbian daughter. And so I didn't do everything my daddy told me to. And so there I was grotesque. He didn't make me grotesque. My parents never did. But I knew that by the registers of criminal justice system, sodomy laws in North Carolina, it was a class H felony. It was 10 years if you got caught in sex that was reinforced by the Hardwick decision in Georgia in 1995. Or you're a pervert under most of the Christian regimes at that point, or you're sick by the DSM. It got changed in 72, you know. So I knew all of that stuff, and I knew, oh wow, like I could lose everything that I have, which was more than Dorothy had. within that system. And that made me trustworthy, I think.
And
I couldn't articulate it, but I felt it. And I had to go find the reason for it.
we talked a little bit this morning about the ways in which throughout Southern literature, queerness and class and disability often compromises whiteness, right? So there are these moments throughout Southern literature where a white character becomes less white in the racial hierarchy because of their otherness within whiteness. And that either can be a tragedy for the white character, or it can be this moment of consciousness blossoming within the character where they can choose to disavow whiteness or be a traitor to whiteness and become a person in solidarity with the rest of humanity, right? It's often this moment of like, oh, this little glimpse of what is possible. And we don't often, the stories end up with the character choosing to reify whiteness, right? It's not, the possibilities are not always optimistic, but we do see it. And certainly in your case and in Dorothy's case, your otherness within whiteness helped you choose solidarity with people of color and with other folks in all kinds of movements.
And not always perfectly, as many people pointed out. And I learned a lot from them. I've had a lot of good instruction in my life, including Dorothy's 6-point letter.
So we talked about the grotesque as we're living in this moment right now where we're trying to figure out what tools do we have, we who are oppressed at various intersections, right?
And they're coming to get us.
And they're coming to get us, right? And for us as queers and as trans folks, like, we are being portrayed as grotesque right now, right? And it's monstrous. I was thinking as you were talking about the Alabama not the National Guard, but the state troopers. Any binary that has to be reinforced with that many state troopers is not a natural binary, right? And that is what we are seeing now with gender, right? Anything that has to be reified with this many laws is a social construct. And we know that about race and we know that about gender. And yet the force of all these laws is coming down on us right now. And so one of the recourses that many queer people have used over the years and trans people have used over the years is to say, well, F respectability, we're going to embrace our grotesquerie, right? And the South has done the same thing, has said, well, we are, the difference between us and the North is we put all our freaks on parade. Like, y'all have them too, but we let ours out on the front porch. So what do you think about the utility of the grotesque as a political tool?
Well, this is where Dorothy and I are having a fight too, a little bit of argument, because like when I went to Huntington College from Tuskegee and fell in love with one of my roommates, dearly, deeply in love, and we were both pretty tortured. I mean, you step away from your family, you go to college, and then you start to be able to see things and think about them. Maybe you study a little about them. Wish I'd gone to the University of Alabama, but and we would get drunk every Friday night, and we got very drunk, and we just crawled up in the bushes behind Huntington and just cried for a couple hours, like just about all the things in our family that we couldn't even tell each other what we felt. And we were both English majors, and we studied these Southern writers. And Delia said, in terms of this grotesque, and this is really what I was driving from, we felt if we could just be warped enough, we would be works of art. So we could drink, like if we drank, if we did all these things, then we would be a kind of warped art form. We would have a warped form. And I didn't like that. I didn't want that. I didn't want to be a monster, you can be monstrous. I mean, you can choose to perform that, but I did not want myself to feel like a monster or a pervert or a sinner or a criminal. It pissed me off, in fact. And so I was trying to attack the structures, including the aesthetic structures I felt like enforced that as a kind of internalized homophobia. People persuade, or racism, whatever, people persuade you're that, and then it's hard not to start acting like that, especially if you can get killed if you don't, which happens anyway. And I learned that pretty early too. So it was different sides, I think, of the same coin, but let's see, I lost a little bit of track of what I was saying. What was I saying?
Do you think there's a political utility?
Yeah, right. So I don't think there's a political utility in internalized oppression and then acting it out in our shape, in misshaping ourselves. I want the utility of challenging that system so that we don't have those enforced things. It doesn't mean, though, that we don't honor the art forms, or Dorothy's argument, find much more subtle and complicated ways to express ourselves kind of underneath the master's nose. You know, a lot of that literature, I mean, Black literature is brilliant in this, and really a record of all the things we will need to know if we have to go back to any of this, any of it. So I think over the years, we've gotten a lot more complicated, giving and taking, much more literary criticism, many more people allowed into universities as women, as out queers, as Black and brown people, into places we didn't get to go, and have had really a revolution in a curriculum that they're trying now to destroy. They can press a button and all the DEI is supposed to be out the window like that because they know how dangerous it is. You know, so all of that, though, has taught more subtlety about this, more appreciation, I would say, from my partner, the Dorothy dialectic, that there is that richness to it, and there is a resistance within it, and that you can recognize that's a different form than the folks who are just either martinet acting it out or imposing it from above, you know. So in terms of today, it's hard to know what to do, you know, like, because it's coming at us so fast. And I feel like they want to go back to all the bad things, you know, like they're our worst, the things we broke the back of, they want to put back together, you know, and they kind of study this. So what's the strategy for that? But I do feel like, too, like I tell my younger queer folks, like, I've been a criminal, I've been a Class H felon, I've been a sinner, I've been a pervert, and I did pretty good. You know, I had a very good life because we challenged that, and we knew our freedom. We knew our freedom, and we knew what it was up against this other thing. So we can, you know, like, not everybody survives it, and not everybody dies. Everybody dies. So you need to know what your life, we need to be reminded what our lives were. And in that context, we might have to, we can have the same and opposite strategy. I just want people to know what maps are. I want them to know.
Paper maps.
Yeah, right. Not the deep, you know, when it all goes down. How do you get around? That kind of thing. So anyway, it's not exactly an answer to your question.
No, it is. And I think it feeds into the next one, which is about fugitivity. So y'all are probably all Southern scholars, so you probably are, you know, have at least are conversant with it, and, you know, have thought about the way that the word fugitive has a lot of resonances throughout Southern culture. And this is one of Dorothy's points. She says, I'd like you to think a little bit more about the word fugitive. It turns up so much in Southern culture, and there is a lot hidden behind it. I'd like to find somebody else who saw a link between the fugitive, the one still running, and what is being run away from. The reference to fugitive in the new criticism, Gloria Hull's reference to your true self in fugitive pieces, taking flight as in fugitive slaves, Tennessee Williams' play, The Fugitive Kind, fleeting transitory images, the Southern working class dispossessed and driven north, and queers, honey, queers. In the oddest way, in this piece, you are talking about just this idea. Who is running and what is being run
But
from?
what if I don't want to run or be run from?
Yeah.
You know, like, I don't get locked, you know, it's the same question, you know,
Yeah.
like, those times we'll need to flee and those times we'll need to fight. And, you know, like, people might need to flee us if we do it right, you know, or, you know, so, you know, so there's something else I've always wanted than those choices, I think.
Yeah, they are. I mean, it is a limited choice, for sure. And I think she would say, I think she even does say somewhere in here, like, choice is a class privilege, right? Like, not everybody gets choice, right? And
But the other thing she says is she's only like, she believes in individual accountability. You know, she wants to know what the individual is going to do about it and to be held accountable for her moral actions. She doesn't have a hope or a confidence. She has a cynicism about systemic change. But that's what we got. You know, like, I grew up around too many very brave Black people risking and sometimes losing their lives to transform a Jim Crow system, and did it, cracked it, not thoroughly enough, and unfortunately, but so I believe in systemic change. It's also related to personal change, and I think she does too, actually.
She talks about what it means. So both she and Barbara Smith were people who grew up in the South and left. And she kind of is, as part of this fugitive conversation, she's talking about, well, what does it mean to be a Southern writer if you don't live in the South anymore? And if, in fact, you fled the South for political reasons. And she says, I do think that I do write as a Southerner, and oddly so too does Barbara Smith in a way. Ask her about it sometime. But both of us claim it because in a very real way, the right to do so is denied us. We claim it as a resistance. We claim it as fugitives who feel we cannot survive in the region we love. And then she says, but we both write as fugitives, which is very much how I see that list you describe. Fugitives, outsiders, queers, lesbians, people who would change the world and who will.
Right, people who will change the world and who will. So we're not running.
Yeah.
And people don't have to run. So I think we came together right at that. And, I think we could stop it here to get to like the other stuff, because I think
Yeah,
let's people.
You want to talk about the hope piece and then get to the.
Yeah.
Let's talk just a little bit about the hope piece. So she begins the letter about saying, reading your writing has given me so much hope. And then her last sort of closing paragraph is, about transformation, I can say little to you. I have hope, but I have suspicion. What really changes? I keep wanting to ask. I have no faith in God, and none really in the goodness of women or lesbians. I don't see all that much difference between women and men, except in their actual power to do me harm. And surprisingly, some women have more power to do that than some men. But I have hope. And what hope I do have actually comes out of much of the literature you treat. And hell, I'm writing this to you, and shit, that is hopeful for both of us. So reading this letter gave me hope, and thinking about
I hope y'all found it interesting.
thinking about what it means to sort of transmit hope across generations, and also have the feeling that nothing is new again, but there are different ways that we can sort of talk back to one another across the generations, is really powerful to me. And also this idea that Dorothy feared a grotesque and lonely death, and that's not what happened to her. So you're gonna read a little bit about your actual sort of memory of her at the time of her death.
Or my text, I won this one. Dorothy said she was going to die a grotesque death, and she didn't. I'm very glad. And so I'll just read this part. We came in and out of each other's lives over the years. Over the years, we've been sure to see each other. If I was in San Francisco, she was at a university more or less near me on the East Coast on a gig. But this contact was intermittent because I did not hear of her partner Alex Lehman's death from brain cancer until a year after it happened. Horrified, I reached out by phone, and she answered immediately, grief-stricken and furious at her loss and at Alex's suffering. I listened for a long time. We were grateful to hear each other's voices. Above all, we appreciated each other's sense of humor and sentence style. I pinned our subsequent text to my message page. I wanted in a period of her desolation to keep her writing, at least writing texts. Over these usually very funny, at other times very sober conversations, Dorothy at one point worried for the young authors she had mentored and birthed into this maelstrom, she said, of a country. I said that I figured she had made them stronger to meet the times. In this regard, she also apologized to me for leaving me so much to do, and I accepted her apology. We shared about children and my grandchild, worries and joys, her dog Coda, the raging climate-induced fires right on the other side of the river that, thank God, never jumped the banks. She shared how much she cherished the community of women, many of them also widows, that she had in Gurneyville, north of San Francisco. Then came this one text. Dorothy wrote October 26, 2024, 3:11 p.m. It's day by day here, but the doc is clear that I am dying. Matter of weeks most likely, but not in pain, so grateful. Tumor in my belly, bile duct cancer going everywhere. I am sanguine. Me, October 27, 10:14. Is this true? I'm so, I'm so sorry. I'm glad you're not trying to get my head around it. What do you need? Can we set a time to talk? Dorothy, I'm at the Chinese restaurant, takeout, with my caretakers. They are ordering soup, which is about the only thing I seem able to consume. Going home after this, would love to talk to you or call this phone now. Me, how's it going? Who are your caretakers? She, day by day, Joy is here and very loving. I seem to be dying slowly enough to cope. The social workers are persistent and occasionally useful. My sense of humor is life-saving, though occasionally rough on my caretakers. Sending you much love. Eat a biscuit for me, Dorothy. Me, please don't say goodbye too soon. You are not dead yet, and I can still hear your voice. Dorothy, thank you, honey. Dorothy on the 28th. I am here and conscious for calls anytime today. Call at your convenience. The last call was reassuring in that Dorothy's voice was strong and she was totally there. She won't die soon, I told myself, but I think she knew and she was preparing me. For anyone then, and I heard about it on the internet, I wanted to be on the list that first call, but that was in New York. For anyone then wondering, her last words to them might have been perhaps these words that she said or wrote to me will do. Just remember that I love you and eat a biscuit for me. So Dorothy died a good death. Surrounded with much love and admiration.
So we want to open it up for questions. And, you know, if you also have just other questions about Dorothy Allison's legacy, one of the things that we kind of contemplated was just what does it mean to be a lost Southern voice? Because in some ways, Dorothy was never lost, right? And in other ways, she never, like most queer Southern writers, never got the same level of respect she might have, even though she did have this amazing one book that really skyrocketed. She might have had an even larger career had she not been queer and had she not been poor, right? And so, yeah, we can open it up for questions. Yes. Do we have the mic? Yeah. I'm going to bring you my mic. How about that?
We have one. Sorry.
A big voice.
Well, thank you. I'm curious about the absence of her contemporaries writing about her. There were so many, so why haven't we seen something reflective of her life, her impact?
Some are dead, but also it's taken a while. Like there's memorials, going to be a memorial in New York. I've been on memorial Zoom calls, and it was in the New York Times, but she died on, this may be the answer, she died on November the 5th, the day after the election. So I think the news got swamped, as it tends to be these days, by you know who, but and you know, we're doing it now, so I think after somebody dies, it kind of takes a while for it to ripple through. I was at a memorial kind of get together at a bar in Durham, and people saying, oh my gosh, like Trump beat Dorothy because he drowned out her voice. I said, no, nobody ever drowns out that voice. It just, if you think about having a death in the family, you got to get yourself, like however you anticipated it, it's startling. And then you have to start these processes of letting people know and figuring out the cremation of, like it just unwinds a certain way. And then friends have to hear about it and get ourselves together. And then there have been several Zooms, because we all Zoom these days. But there's going to be an in-person memorial in New York and in San Francisco. And there should be more written about her, but I think that's the lostness of it. Like I say, she did get a very good obituary in the Times, which for writers, getting a good review and a good obituary is one of the standards. But I am anticipating, too, that folks who know Southern literature, this will start to diffuse, and more people will write about the writer. And I'm really happy that y'all invited me today to be able to share this. What did you think of what she wrote? If I can ask you that. Would you? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
One of the things that I think was amazing about Dorothy is that she was such a teacher, and so a lot of her contributions have been to people who are younger than her, even more than to her contemporaries. Though obviously she was very generous to her contemporaries, but she was somebody who would blurb almost any book that any. I mean, she and I knew each other only very little, but every time I saw her, she would say, "Is your book ready? Are you ready? I'm gonna write you a blurb when you're ready." And she said, "I'll introduce you to my agent. You just tell me what you need. I'll do whatever you need." Um, and she did that for anybody that she really had a student relationship with. And there were, I mean, I would like to think I'm special, but there were a lot of people who were special to her as students. And her generosity, I think, my hope is that people who have been mentored or have been students of hers will write something, because I think she has influenced. If you talk to people of my generation, or like people who were between 55 and 35 probably, um, I think that and Stone Butch Blues, like Dorothy's work and Stone Butch Blues, are the two books that for a lot of us like brought us to a certain kind of queer consciousness.
But this is also the lostness of whole categories. Like it, like Dorothy is well known and loved within lesbian, gay, LGBT, all those letters communities, and some beyond that too, and people who have studied her. But um, we don't. And when she got that, she was the first real. She was the second lesbian writer to go mainstream like that, to get that kind of Times brilliant accolade. I mean, just pulled out all the stops. Um, but now her books are banned. All of these books are going to be banned if, they're already in the process of it, pulling them out of libraries, like just, and really casting us, just all the things they're doing, so it's a battle that, once you write and once you publish, it's really a battle still. I had to pay a publicist $5,000 a month to get a little bit on this book, So it doesn't just automatically happen. I wish you better luck. I'm actually interested in what you're writing. So anyway, thanks for the question.
I think one of our responsibilities as readers and as people who care about Southern literature is keeping these books alive, and keeping them, giving them to people as kind of a lifeline. Because I do think for so many, folks who grew up very poor, for incest survivors, for people who were part of S&M communities and felt shame or, made to feel weird about that, Dorothy's work has been a lifeline of like, there's nothing wrong with you, and I think that like the grotesque part of it is also, she really reclaimed the beauty of that, and part of the way she did it was through beautiful sentences. So writing about
And
something,
compassion and love.
and compassion and love. But I think from the art and craft part of it is like writing beautiful sentences about things that are terrible is one way of saying you are deserving of dignity and care, right? And so from a literature point of view, I think we got to hold on to that too. Like it's not just about writing, tracks. It's about how do you make poetry of something awful that you've gone through. How do you make it sing? And Toni Morrison and the Bluest Eye is an example of that, right? It's like how to write about something so horrific and make it just some of the most beautiful sentences ever. And I think Dorothy learned a lot from Toni Morrison too.
But I also think like they can't put our genies back in the bottle. There's too many genies out there, floating around. And they, like what's banned one place is going to be read by 6 different kids because they don't want they don't want me to read it. And there's all the archives now that like I put mine at Duke partly because it's a fortress. I have to storm that place, and they're digitalized, which the web can go down. But there's so much that we've done that's creativity out in the universe that's changed the nature of the universe. And they can think they will repress it, but they can't. And they'll, like it's terrible. We have to see them try. I must say. They will fail. because, yeah.
Mhm. So-
Yeah, they can't take them away all, they can't, you would think that they have eliminated every one of that book from any shelf, but they ban them at the library level and the county level because they go into the boards of education and they, I think, I mean, there's librarians in here. I'm in the library, right? You could probably tell me more, but they get up, they take it with the school board, they put pressure on families and parents. They come in with the list, they pull them all off, they make everybody read them, like they make a commotion about it. And then I think the school board can pull the books, and
So there are a couple of things to know about, and our wonderful librarians are here who can talk about what happens in public libraries. But there are conservative activists for whom this is their reason they have been put on earth, is to really just go after certain books. And they do, this is where the internet gets us in trouble, because they can do keyword searches of books and things like that. One of the most banned books is a book called Genderqueer, and it's a comic, it's a graphic novel. It's actually an adult book, it's not a kid's book. It's about being a non-binary person. It's not in any way particularly political book or offensive book. It's just one person's autobiography, kind of. And I met the author and I said, well, why do you think your book is one of the most banned books? And they said, well, it's got the word gender and the word queer in it. And I was like, oh, they're like, they just plug in these words and that's what comes up at the top of the list. And so there are people who just spend all their time finding books that they find morally objectionable. And some of it is about, a lot of it's about sexuality and gender. A lot of it is about race. So the majority of the books from 2020 to 2024 that were on the most banned list for young people had to do with Black Lives Matter, with, I'm putting in quotes not because Black Lives Matter is not real, but because they said anything that was Black Lives Matter, even stuff that you're like, this is just about a Black kid going to high school, right? That was dealing with, racism in their school. What we know is that there's also a lot of quiet compliance among particularly school librarians, where they pull books before the books are challenged. And that's what we really encourage all of you to be vigilant about. We also encourage you to be interested in your local school board, even if you don't have kids. You don't have to have kids to be on the school board, by the way. So if you care about education, and particularly if you care about the right to read, pay attention to who's on your school board, because since 2020, there's been a massive influx of right-wing people onto school boards across the country, even in liberal areas. They have strategically gone around and infiltrated all these school boards because they know that that's how they affect culture. Because we have won the culture war. As you said, you can't put the genie back in the bottle, but they are trying to pull all the books off the shelf. And they think they're playing the long game. They think that they can not save this generation, but they can keep the next generation from accessing these books. So they've written off this generation. But the kids who are 5 now, they're trying to prevent from learning all these concepts.
But the reason why there's a sign that says ban books and a list of them in a bookstore is because the bookstore is advertising them so you can buy them.
Yeah.
These are the most interesting books. You might want to know what they're doing. Yeah.
It also makes kids want to read them.
Yeah. But the other thing, like once they do those searches, I mean, just I can't say idiots anymore after writing this book, but they're just so like evilly stupid. But they do these searches, but apparently on their gay hunt, they typed in Enola Gay, and a lot of people learned about the atomic bomb because that was the plane. The plane was named Enola Gay. So everything that's gay is not necessarily homosexual. Just one over here.
I'm just wondering, what are they afraid of? What is fear?
I think you're right. I think the people the people at the top are doing it aren't afraid. They just want to make another $600 billion, and they want to stir other people's fear up about their children and what's going to happen to their children, you know, and or they're afraid of hell. You know, they're afraid of the wrong 6 verses in the Bible. You know, like doesn't have anything to do with all the red letters. My friend Stella said, "I'm a Christian, but it's the red letters in the Bible," which is what Jesus actually said. You know, instead of.
I don't know who, I don't, okay.
Oh,
He has a
Belgium,
band
yeah.
book club. I don't know about it, but I think anybody who's encouraging somebody to read banned books is probably a good,
Yeah.
anybody who's encouraging anybody to read anything. I'm
We got
pretty
two
into
back
it.
here. Yeah. 2 questions.
Yep. Yeah, so
There's a bunch of books out there on the table, for one thing, but
Crash is her book of short stories, and that is my personal favorite. She has the introduction that opens that book is literally about how she wrote to save her life, right? And it's about writing out of addiction and having the confidence in yourself despite everything to write your life story after the whole world has told you that you are grotesque and disgusting and unworthy of care and love. And what a radical act that is, because there is nothing in our culture that told Dorothy Allison that not only did she have a right to tell a story, but that her story would go on to be this million-selling book, right? And I think it's a thing that I reread all the time because I think it is really helpful for people to. It's helpful to me as a writer, and it's helpful to so many people to just be like, right, you can write yourself out of the worst place with nothing.
you know, people should read, but should also write. You know, like
Yeah.
everybody should be right. You know, I mean, we were really encouraged to write our stories in this kind of wave of feminism. Like, it's really important to tell our stories, and it's still important to tell our stories and find places for them and create structures for them, which we had to do from scratch. Really, bookstores. for instance.
One of her very powerful stories in that book is called River of Names, and it is just a litany of names of all of her kin who have been murdered or killed in crazy ways because of being poor, right? And so, the resonance of Say Their Names, which is part of the Black Lives Matter movement, I thought a lot about what would it have meant if in our country, like poor white people and black people who had been murdered by the police and murdered by, structural violence, if we could see those rivers of names together, right? Like if we could really be braiding those rivers of names together, because it is the sort of litany is a very similar thing. And there's a power of that sort of accumulation. And so that's a beautiful story too. Linda, thank you. One of the things that an activist said to me is everybody should think about 3 things that you know how to teach that you want to be teaching younger people, right? Because they can't take what we already know. And I know many people in this room are professors, and we kind of get stuck in our grooves around where we can teach, but we can teach wherever we need to. And I think it's a good reminder that we carry so much knowledge inside of us, and we don't need classrooms, and we don't need the academy to do that. And we certainly, many of us don't have tenure, so we can, get free of that and think about what a gift it is to be able to share stories like this. And to teach outside of the traditional places, because that's the way that we're going to save a lot of the knowledge that we need to transmit to the next generation. And I'm so grateful to you, Mab, for telling me stories and telling me the inside gossip too, because some of it's just fun. It's not all academic, and how lucky we are to have had Dorothy in our lives.
I want to do one small commercial too, and this is a continuation of discussion of the Gothic and the grotesque. Like, my latest project, trying to understand it, is this study of Georgia Central State Hospital for over its 170 years. I mean, it went back to Oglethorpe. In fact, by the time I went to figure out, like, how do you determine what's sane and insane in a slave culture that's already wiped out, moved the Native people out. And I spent like 15 years, and I spent a lot of time in Georgia. had a lot and really enjoyed it. And it came out right in the pandemic. So I'm not a Georgian, but this is a Georgia book. And I'm very happy that I'll be teaching it at Morehouse University School of Medicine. In August, they do one semester. They do 1 month semesters. I'm going to teach it with Sarah Vinson, who's chair of the psych department. She'll do the real medicine. I'll do the history of it and where it comes from. And I'm hoping to do it in August and also in the spring. So we'll be back in Georgia, but it also, I think, I want to get this material right to doctors. And I think this would be a good way to do it. So.
And also, if you're an O'Connor scholar, knowing that all this was happening in Milledgeville in the background really helps you understand why O'Connor was the way she was. So it's an incredible book about Milledgeville, but also just more generally about sort of why the South is the way it is.
It tells the story of Georgia from its lunatic asylum, and this is what Dorothy wrote about it. So just in terms of Dorothy. There is madness after all, and then there's madness with a capital M, the threat of what might happen if you argue with your husband or disagree with your fellow citizens. Now that this history those that this history dismisses need someone to speak for them. Now they have Mab Segrest, who gives us a clear-eyed view of what was going on just up the road from Flannery O'Connor's house. This is a huge piece of work and a profoundly great book.
So we'll let Dorothy have the last word. Thank you all so much for being with us.